The chainsaw's growl died to silence as the massive chestnut tree groaned, then crashed across Backbone Ridge with a sound like thunder rolling through the hollow. March wind scattered sawdust and bark chips across the forest floor, while Bobby Hensley wiped sweat from his forehead and reached for his water bottle. The ancient trunk had split clean down the middle, revealing heartwood dark as old blood. Something glinted in the exposed cavity. Bobby stepped closer, squinting at what looked like fabric caught in the wood grain. White cotton, he thought. Maybe an old shirt or sheet blown into a hollow years ago. Then he saw the bone, a small radius still connected to delicate finger bones. His hands trembled as he brushed away more bark fragments. Two skulls nested together in the tree's hollow core, eye sockets filled with century-old dirt. Scraps of blue gingham dress clung to tiny ribs, and there, threaded through what remained of braided hair, were two ribbons. One yellow, one red, still bright after 100 years in darkness. Morning fog clung to the ridgelines above Caney Creek like smoke from a dying fire. In the valley below, the sound of hammer on anvil rang out from Ezra McClure's forge, while his daughters prepared for their walk to the schoolhouse 3 miles down the mountain. 8-year-old Lily tied her yellow ribbon with careful fingers, the same way their mother had taught her before consumption claimed her the previous winter. 10-year-old Rose helped her sister with the knots, then smoothed down her own red ribbon. Their father watched from the cabin doorway, coffee growing cold in his calloused hands. "Mind the creek crossings," Ezra called as the girls shouldered their satchels. Rains made them treacherous. Rose nodded solemnly, the way oldest children do when they understand their burden. She took Lily's small hand in hers, and they set off down the narrow trail that wound between towering chestnuts and ancient oaks. Their footsteps crunched through frost-brittle leaves, while mockingbirds called from the branches above. The schoolhouse sat in a clearing where Caney Creek bent around a stand of white birch trees. Teacher Sarah Whitfield had arrived from Asheville just that autumn, bringing with her book learning and gentle manners that both impressed and unsettled the mountain families. She rang the bell at 8 o'clock sharp each morning, its bronze voice carrying across the hollow to call the scattered children from their chores. By 8:15 on that November morning in 1904, 17 children had taken their places on the rough-hewn benches. The McClure sisters were not among them. Sarah checked her pocket watch and frowned. Rose and Lily were never late. The older girl took her responsibilities seriously, perhaps too seriously for a 10-year-old. She often stayed after lessons to help clean the slate boards and stack the primers. When 8:30 came and went with no sign of the sisters, Sarah dismissed the class for morning recess and sent young Tommy Birch running up the mountain trail toward the McClure place. The boy returned an hour later, breathless and wide-eyed. He had followed the trail all the way to Ezra's cabin, checking each creek crossing and calling their names into the forest. No one answered. Ezra McClure was shoeing a horse for a neighbor, and when Tommy told him his daughters had never reached school, the big man's face went white as ash. The hammer slipped from his fingers and clanged against the anvil with a sound that seemed to echo off every ridge for miles. Search parties formed like gathering storm clouds across the ridgelines. Men emerged from cabins and clearings carrying lanterns, rope, and the grim knowledge that mountains keep their secrets. Ezra McClure moved through the forest like a man possessed, his voice cracking as he called his daughters' names. "Rose! Lily!" The words bounced off rock faces and disappeared into darkness between the trees. Bloodhounds arrived from Asheville on the afternoon train, their baying voices adding a mournful harmony to the human searchers. The dogs picked up the scent near the schoolhouse trail, following it for perhaps 200 yards before circling back in confusion. Whatever trail had existed seemed to simply end, as if the girls had vanished into thin air. Tracking expert Samuel Garrett, who had found lost hunters from here to Tennessee, shook his head in bewilderment. "Never seen the like," he told the gathering crowd. "Trail just stops, like they stepped off the earth itself." November rain began falling on the third day, washing away whatever traces might have remained. The search widened to include every cave, ravine, and hidden hollow within 5 miles of the creek. Men rappelled down cliff faces and crawled through gaps in the rock, barely wide enough for a child. They found bear dens and wildcat lairs, abandoned mine shafts, and forgotten settlers' cabins. They did not find Rose and Lily McClure. Local folklore offered its own explanations. Old Martha Hensley, whose family had lived in these mountains since before the Revolution, spoke of the ancient chestnut groves where Cherokee medicine men once held counsel with forest spirits. "Some trees are older than memory," she told anyone who would listen. "They remember when this land belonged to others. Sometimes they reclaim what was always theirs." Most folks dismissed her talk as mountain superstition. But as the weeks turned to months with no trace of the girls, even the most practical men began to wonder if there might be truth hidden in the old woman's words. Ezra McClure's hammer fell silent in the weeks following his daughter's disappearance. The forge grew cold, orders went unfilled, and neighbors began leaving food on his cabin porch when he stopped answering their knocks. Inside the one-room dwelling, he sat beside the small bed the girls had shared, holding their hairbrush and the few clothes they had left behind. The yellow and red ribbons they typically wore lay coiled in a wooden box their mother had carved. He would not let them be buried without his children. December brought the first heavy snow, blanketing the search area under 3 feet of white silence. Even the most determined volunteers had to admit defeat. The official search was called off just before Christmas, though Ezra continued his solitary walks through the forest. He developed a route that took him past every place his daughters had ever played, every swimming hole where they had laughed through summer afternoons, every berry patch where they had filled their aprons with blackberries and their mouths with purple juice. Teacher Sarah Whitfield tried to comfort him, bringing soup and gentle conversation when he would accept visitors. "They were good girls," she would say, settling into the chair beside his cold fireplace. Rose was reading at a level far beyond her years, and Lily, she had such artistic talent. Her drawings of forest animals were remarkable for a child her age. Ezra would nod and stare into the empty hearth, unable to speak the words that crowded his throat. The past tense felt like betrayal. His daughters were not memories. They were somewhere in these mountains, and he would find them. As winter deepened, strange reports began filtering through the community. Hunters spoke of hearing children's laughter echoing from empty clearings. A traveling preacher claimed he had seen 2 small figures dancing between the trees near Backbone Ridge, their white dresses glowing like foxfire in the moonlight. When he called out to them, they melted into shadow. These accounts were whispered in general stores and church pews, shared over kitchen tables when children were safely asleep. No one wanted to believe in haints and spirits, but no one could explain where Rose and Lily McClure had gone. The mountain kept what it wanted. Spring arrived early in 1905, bringing wildflowers and fresh hope that the thaw might reveal what winter had hidden. Ezra emerged from his cabin like a bear from hibernation, his beard grown long and his eyes hollow with sleepless nights. He resumed his searches with methodical intensity, mapping every square foot of forest floor with the precision of a surveyor. Other men joined him on weekends, but as the months passed, their enthusiasm waned. Families had their own concerns, their own responsibilities. "Man's got to accept what the Lord gives and takes," said Deacon Cyrus Webb from the pulpit of Caney Creek Baptist Church that June. His words carried the weight of mountain wisdom, the practical theology of people who survived by accepting hard truths. But Ezra McClure did not attend services anymore. He spent his Sundays walking ridgelines and calling into valleys where his voice came back empty and mocking. The community's response shifted from active support to polite distance. When Ezra appeared at the general store or blacksmith gatherings, conversations grew stilted and eyes turned away. His grief had become uncomfortable, a reminder that the mountains could take anyone's children. Mothers pulled their own daughters closer when they saw him approaching. Not from fear, but from the superstitious dread that his loss might somehow be contagious. What would you do if your neighbor's pain made you question the safety of your own world? Would you stand with him in his impossible search, or would you turn away to protect your own peace of mind? The people of Caney Creek chose survival over solidarity, wrapping themselves in the comforting fiction that such tragedies only happen to others. By autumn, even Sarah Whitfield had stopped her visits to the McClure cabin. The school board had quietly suggested she focus her attention on the children who remained, rather than dwelling on those who were lost. She kept Rose and Lily's names on the attendance roll through Christmas of that year, marking them absent each day with a hand that trembled slightly as she made the notation. When the new year began, she finally erased their names from the board. Sheriff James Morton had served Davidson County for 12 years before the McClure case crossed his desk. He was a practical man who believed in evidence, witnesses, and logical explanations. Missing children meant runaways, family disputes, or tragic accidents. They did not simply vanish without trace, especially not in country where people knew every ridge and hollow for miles around. But after 6 months of investigation, Morton found himself facing the impossible. His reports, filed in the courthouse basement, tell a story of mounting frustration. Initial witness statements numbered 47 people who had seen the girls on the morning of their disappearance. None saw them after they left their father's cabin. The trail evidence ended abruptly at a fallen log 200 yards from the schoolhouse. Beyond that point, the ground showed no disturbance, no footprints, no broken branches or torn clothing to suggest struggle or flight. November 14th, 1905. Case File 7-12. Investigation suspended pending new evidence. No indication of foul play. No evidence of accident. No credible witness testimony beyond morning departure from family residence. Morton's final report reads like the admission of a man confronted with mystery beyond his understanding. He recommended the case remain open, but acknowledged that county resources could not be indefinitely devoted to a search that had yielded nothing. Behind the official language lay a deeper truth. The sheriff's department had received pressure from county commissioners to close the investigation. Missing persons cases reflected poorly on tourism prospects, and the railroad companies building through the region wanted no talk of dangerous mountains or mysterious disappearances. Economic development took precedence over one mountain father's grief, especially when that grief had no clear resolution. The McClure case was quietly transferred to inactive files in 1806. Sheriff Morton retired the following year and moved to Charlotte, where he never spoke publicly about the investigation that had ended his mountain career. His successor, a younger man with political ambitions, made it clear that the county was moving forward. The past, no matter how painful, would not be allowed to impede progress. Among the ancient chestnuts that crowned Backbone Ridge, one tree commanded special reverence from the Cherokee families who had once called these mountains home. Before removal, before treaties, before the arrival of European settlers, this particular giant had served as a landmark and gathering place. Its massive trunk, wide enough that 6 men holding hands could not encircle it, bore scars from ceremonial cuts and carved symbols that spoke of seasons, harvests, and the passage of generations. The white families who claimed the land after 1838 treated the marked tree with a mixture of curiosity and superstition. They called it the council oak, though any botanist could see it was clearly American chestnut. Its height dwarfed the surrounding forest, and its canopy spread wide enough to shelter a small cabin. Children were warned away from playing near its base, not from any specific danger, but from the general mountain wisdom that some places belonged to older powers. When Rose and Lily McClure vanished, several search parties had rested in the tree's shade while combing the surrounding forest. Men ate their lunch among its buttressing roots and watered their horses at the spring that bubbled up nearby. The massive trunk showed no signs of hollows or cavities large enough to hide a child, let alone 2. Its bark grew thick and unbroken from ground level to the first branches, 30 feet above. But trees, especially ancient ones, hold secrets in their heartwood that surface examination cannot reveal. They grow around objects, incorporate foreign matter, heal over wounds that happened decades before. The Cherokee elders had known this. They understood that the forest remembered everything, recorded every tragedy and triumph in rings of wood that only revealed their stories when the tree finally fell. For 99 years after the McClure sisters disappeared, the council oak continued its silent vigil over Backbone Ridge. Seasons turned, storms passed, and the great tree endured. Its trunk grew thicker, its rings recording drought and flood, fire and renewal. Deep within its heartwood, 2 small skeletons rested in darkness, wrapped in wood grain and preserved by the chemistry of tannins and time. Hensley Logging came to Backbone Ridge in the spring of 2004 with contracts to clear 300 acres for a new development project. The company had operated in western North Carolina for 40 years, turning mountain forests into shopping centers and subdivisions. Their reputation rested on efficiency and their ability to work around environmental restrictions that had made logging increasingly complex. Bobby Hensley, the company owner's grandson, had grown up hearing stories about the missing McClure sisters from his great-grandmother Martha, the same woman who had spoken of trees that remembered ancient treaties. But those were family tales told around kitchen tables, not the kind of history that appeared in environmental impact reports or county planning documents. When the crew began cutting timber on Backbone Ridge, their focus was on board feet and profit margins, not century-old mysteries. The council oak represented both a challenge and a prize. Its size meant it would require special equipment and careful planning to fell safely. But the clear heartwood of ancient chestnut could bring premium prices from furniture makers and architectural salvage companies. The tree's location near the ridge crest meant it would need to be cut early in the project to avoid damaging other valuable timber during its fall. Chainsaws capable of handling such massive timber had only become common in the past decade. Earlier logging operations would have required cross-cut saws and teams of men working for days to bring down a tree of this magnitude. But modern equipment made quick work of even the most imposing giants. Bobby positioned his crew at dawn on March 15th, planning to complete the cut and begin processing before the afternoon thunderstorms that were forecast for the region. The tree's heartwood was darker than expected, almost black in places where the growth rings had been compressed by some ancient trauma. As Bobby saw a bit deeper into the trunk, he noticed the wood grains swirling in unusual patterns, as if the tree had grown around obstacles that were no longer visible. When the massive trunk finally split along its length, those obstacles revealed themselves in the most shocking way possible. The Watauga County Coroner's Office had seen unusual cases before. Mountain terrain yielded its dead reluctantly, sometimes preserving bodies in caves or bogs for decades before discovery. But when Bobby Hensley's phone call came in that March afternoon, Deputy Coroner Rachel Hayes knew she was facing something unprecedented. Human remains found inside a living tree challenged every assumption about decomposition, preservation, and the normal processes of death and burial. The initial examination at the scene revealed two skeletons in remarkable condition considering their age. The tree's natural chemistry had created an environment similar to bog preservation, tanning the remains until they resembled leather more than bone. Scraps of fabric still clung to the ribs and limbs, and personal effects remained intact. Most remarkably, two ribbons were still threaded through braided hair that had darkened to the color of old pennies but retained its basic structure. Hayes photographed everything in situ before authorizing removal. The position of the bodies suggested the children had been placed carefully rather than hidden hastily. They lay side by side, smaller skeleton's hand resting on the larger one's arm in what might have been a final gesture of comfort. No obvious trauma marked the bones, though soft tissue damage would not necessarily survive a century of preservation. The discovery sent ripples through both law enforcement and academic communities. Forensic anthropologists from the University of North Carolina arrived within hours, followed by botanists trying to understand how living wood could grow around human remains. The Cherokee Museum in Cherokee, North Carolina, sent representatives to examine the ceremonial markings on the tree trunk and to understand any cultural significance the site might hold. March 18, 2004. Field notes, preliminary examination. Remains consistent with juvenile females, approximate ages 8 to 10 years. Preservation extraordinary due to tannin-rich environment. Artifacts include fabric consistent with early 20th century manufacturing. Dental development suggests European ancestry. Cause of death undetermined pending full laboratory analysis. The coroner's careful language could not capture the profound strangeness of discovery that challenged everything investigators thought they knew about death, burial, and the mountains themselves. The mountain had kept what it wanted. Now it was finally ready to give them back. News of the discovery spread through the valleys like wildfire, carried by cell phone calls and internet forums to a world that had never heard of Rose and Lily McClure. Within 48 hours, reporters from Charlotte, Asheville, and Atlanta descended on the quiet mountain community that had guarded its secrets for a century. Satellite trucks clogged the narrow mountain roads, while camera crews competed for interviews with anyone old enough to remember the original disappearance. Ethel McClure Thornton, 87 years old, and the last surviving member of the family, found herself thrust into unwanted spotlight. As Ezra McClure's niece, she had grown up hearing stories about the missing sisters from relatives who remembered the search. Her great-uncle had died in 1923, still convinced his daughters lived somewhere in the mountains. He had been found at the base of a cliff near Backbone Ridge. Whether from accident or intention, no one could say. They were real girls, Ethel told the reporters who crowded into her small apartment at the Asheville Assisted Living Facility. Not just stories, not just legend. They had favorite dolls and liked to catch fireflies, and Rose could whistle any tune she heard. Her voice carried the tremor of age and the weight of vindication. For decades, city folks had dismissed the McClure disappearance as mountain folklore, another tall tale from people whose education came from experience rather than books. The Cherokee representatives brought their own perspective to the discovery. Tribal historian James Owl examined the markings on the council oak and confirmed what his grandmother had told him about the sacred groves. Our people knew some trees were doorways, he explained to skeptical reporters, not in any supernatural sense, but as keepers of memory. This tree held those children for 100 years until someone was ready to find them. Academic experts found themselves confronting evidence that challenged accepted theories about tree growth and preservation. Dr. Margaret Chen, a forensic botanist from North Carolina State University, spent weeks studying core samples from the fallen chestnut. Her analysis revealed that the tree had formed a hollow chamber around the remains sometime in its second century of growth, then continued adding layers of heartwood that sealed the cavity completely. "It's unprecedented," she admitted. "We're dealing with biological processes we don't fully understand." Modern forensic science brought 21st century tools to a 19th century mystery. DNA analysis confirmed what family records suggested. The remains belonged to Rose and Lily McClure. Forensic dentistry matched the teeth to descriptions in the original missing persons reports. Carbon dating verified that the deaths had occurred in the early 1900s, consistent with the family timeline. But determining how two young girls had ended up sealed inside a living tree proved more challenging than identifying them. The lack of trauma to the bones suggested they had not been murdered in any conventional sense. Toxicology analysis was impossible after a century of chemical changes within the tree. The positioning of the skeletons, careful and peaceful, argued against accident or predation. Detective Sarah Martinez, assigned to reopen the McClure case, found herself investigating a crime scene that had been sealed for 100 years. Modern techniques could analyze fiber evidence and trace materials, but they could not explain the central mystery of how living wood had grown around human bodies without any obvious entry point. The tree showed no signs of having been cut open and resealed. Its growth patterns were consistent with natural development over multiple decades. The case files revealed another troubling pattern. 7 other children had vanished in western North Carolina between 1890 and 1920, all from families living near ancient forest groves. The disappearances had been scattered across different counties and decades, too dispersed for anyone to notice the connections. But when mapped together, they formed a rough circle around the oldest stands of virgin timber in the region. June 2nd, 2004. Supplemental investigation notes. Victim placement inconsistent with known burial practices. No evidence of concealment or disposal. Remains appear to have been integrated into tree growth through unknown biological process. Recommend consultation with botanical specialists and Cherokee cultural authorities. Detective Martinez's reports reflected growing awareness that conventional investigative methods might not apply to this case. Dr. Patricia Blackwood had spent 20 years studying old-growth forests in Appalachia, mapping the remnant groves that survived logging and development. When she arrived at Backbone Ridge to examine the Council Oak site, she brought with her knowledge that connected Cherokee oral traditions with modern ecological science. The story she uncovered challenged fundamental assumptions about the relationship between human beings and the ancient forest. Her soil analysis revealed that the area around the fallen tree contained unusually high levels of calcium phosphate, consistent with long-term burial sites. Ground-penetrating radar detected anomalies beneath other large trees in the grove, suggesting additional buried materials of unknown origin. Most significantly, her examination of the Council Oak's ring patterns showed periods of accelerated growth that coincided with documented disappearances in the region. The Cherokee families who lived here before removal spoke of trees that chose their own, Dr. Blackwood explained to the investigation team. Not in any mystical sense, but as observation of natural processes, they understood better than we do. Some trees, especially ancient ones, can integrate organic matter into their growth patterns. They become living burial chambers, preserving what they absorb. Her research revealed that American chestnuts possessed unique biochemical properties that allowed them to incorporate foreign materials while continuing normal growth. The high tannin content created preservation conditions similar to bog environments. Most remarkably, the trees seemed to respond to the presence of organic matter by forming protective chambers that sealed completely as new wood grew around them. The implications were staggering. If Dr. Blackwood's theory was correct, the ancient groves of Appalachia might contain dozens or hundreds of similar preserved remains. Native peoples might have understood and used this natural process for burial practices that left no surface traces. The forest itself had become a vast cemetery, whose graves were marked only by the trees that had absorbed them. Other families began coming forward with stories of relatives who had vanished near old-growth stands. The Cherokee Museum opened its archives to researchers trying to understand traditional relationships between their people and the sacred groves. Slowly, a picture emerged of forests that served as both places of worship and repositories for the dead, where the boundary between burial and preservation had been deliberately blurred. The discovery of Rose and Lily McClure opened wounds that had never properly healed and raised questions that no one was prepared to answer. If the ancient trees had been claiming people for centuries, what did that mean for development projects across the region? Environmental lawyers filed injunctions to halt logging operations near old-growth stands. Cherokee activists demanded protection for sacred groves their ancestors had marked for preservation. Property values in the affected areas began declining as rumors spread about other trees that might contain human remains. Developers who had invested millions in mountain resort projects found their loans called in by nervous banks. The tourism industry, built on marketing the mountains as peaceful retreats, struggled to manage the narrative of forests that harbored century-old secrets. Hensley Logging faced lawsuits from environmental groups and Native American advocacy organizations. Bobby Hensley, who had discovered the remains, found himself caught between competing interests that wanted to exploit or suppress his find. The company's insurance rates skyrocketed as underwriters calculated the potential liability of disturbing other burial sites. Within 6 months, 3 generations of family business had collapsed under the weight of one ancient tree's revelation. The scientific community remained divided about the implications of Dr. Blackwood's research. Some experts argued that the McClure case represented a unique preservation event that was unlikely to be repeated. Others pushed for comprehensive surveys of old-growth stands to determine if additional human remains lay hidden in living wood. The debate raged in academic journals and courtrooms, while the forests themselves continued their patient growth, neither confirming nor denying what secrets they might hold. For the Cherokee Nation, the discovery represented both vindication and violation. Their oral traditions about sacred groves had been dismissed as folklore for generations. Now science was confirming what their elders had always known about the relationship between forest and memory. But that confirmation came at the cost of exposure, turning sacred spaces into subjects of media speculation and legal dispute. The mountain had kept its secrets for so long that their revelation shocked everyone who had forgotten how to listen. Rose and Lily McClure were laid to rest in Caney Creek Cemetery on an October morning, when the leaves blazed red and gold across the ridgelines. Family members who had never known them gathered alongside neighbors whose grandparents remembered the search. The service drew people from across western North Carolina, some motivated by curiosity, others by the desire to witness the end of a mystery that had haunted the mountains for a century. Ethel McClure Thornton, too frail to stand for long, sat in a wheelchair beside the small graves, while Reverend David Hayes spoke words that tried to bridge the gap between earthly loss and spiritual reunion. The yellow and red ribbons that had preserved the girls' identities through 100 years of darkness were buried with them, along with the few possessions they had carried on their final walk to school. Their father's tools, donated by distant relatives, were placed between the graves as a reminder of the man who had never stopped searching. The headstones bore simple inscriptions: Rose McClure, 1894-1904, beloved daughter, and Lily McClure, 1896-1904, beloved sister. Below each name, a single line captured the poetry of their discovery: lost to the mountain, returned by grace. The Cherokee Nation contributed traditional prayers and sacred tobacco to mark the completion of a journey that had taken the children far beyond any earthly destination their family could have imagined. Media attention gradually faded as other stories claimed headlines, but the impact of the discovery continued rippling through academic, legal, and spiritual communities. The Council Oak site became a pilgrimage destination for people seeking connection to mysteries that rational thinking could not fully explain. Cherokee families returned to honor ancestors buried in groves their people had been forced to leave behind. Dr. Blackwood's research expanded into a comprehensive study of old-growth burial practices across Appalachia. Her team identified 17 other sites where ground-penetrating radar detected anomalies consistent with human remains integrated into tree growth. Each discovery brought new questions about the relationship between indigenous peoples and the forests they had considered sacred, about preservation methods that Western science was only beginning to understand. 20 years after the discovery on Backbone Ridge, the story of Rose and Lily McClure has taken root in both academic research and regional folklore. Universities across the Southeast offer courses in forensic botany, studying how trees can serve as natural preservation chambers for organic remains. The Cherokee Museum maintains an archive of oral traditions about sacred groves, working with scientists to understand traditional ecological knowledge that predated European settlement by millennia. The legal implications proved more complex than anyone anticipated. Environmental protection laws were strengthened to require surveys before logging operations in areas with documented Native American heritage. But enforcement remained inconsistent, and development pressure continued mounting as mountain real estate became increasingly valuable. Some sacred groves received formal protection. Others fell to chainsaws before their secrets could be discovered. Hensley Logging never recovered from the financial and legal consequences of their discovery. Bobby Hensley sold the company's remaining assets and moved to Florida, where he rarely spoke about the morning he found 2 skeletons in an ancient tree. In interviews conducted years later, he expressed conflicting emotions about his role in the revelation. "Part of me wishes we'd never cut that tree," he admitted. "Those girls had found peace in there. Maybe we should have left them alone." The McClure family cemetery in Caney Creek draws visitors from around the world, people drawn by a story that seems to confirm that love and memory can transcend death itself. Scientific expeditions continue studying the preservation processes that allowed 2 children to rest undisturbed for a century while the forest grew around them. Cherokee activists use the discovery as evidence that their ancestors understood natural systems in ways that modern society has forgotten. The mountains keep what they want. But sometimes, when the time is right, they give their treasures back. Today, hikers who climb Backbone Ridge can still see the massive stump where the council oak once stood, its roots spreading wide beneath the forest floor, like fingers holding secrets in the earth. The Cherokee Nation has marked the site with a simple bronze plaque, honoring all children lost to history, both those found and those still waiting in the darkness between the trees. On certain mornings when fog rises from the valleys, people report hearing laughter echoing through the ancient groves, the sound of sisters playing games that only mountains remember. Subscribe if you want the next deep dive.